Welcome again to American Christian or Christian American. If you please hit that subscribe button, it helps the channel to grow. And if you like this video, please push that like button. It also helps the videos to get out there to more people. So we're going to talk about the idea of if black people are so intelligent, why don't they just build up their own neighborhoods, their own success stories? That's a question people ask. And I would say they have. And then white people came and tore it down. Let's look at two different videos. First is one of the attitude of how white people viewed African Americans, even though they're the ones that orchestrated some of the things they talk about. And then we'll talk about a massacre that took place in an African American community. So let's look at this.
White man from the South says they saw black people as pets.
As far as the colored people were concerned, I feel that they were a good bit happier than they are now. They had less in the way of material things. But I can remember back in their 20s, when I was a small boy, they were always singing at their work. They had a great sense of humor. And now today, they just don't seem to care much about that as they used to. And I think they've lost their sense somewhat, which I deplore.
Mr. Hasty, what did you think we were before you began to think of us as human beings?
Well, in a way, we thought of you almost as a very superior pet. Something, or rather someone, we had to take care of. Because we had to do so much of their thinking for them. We had to do almost everything for them except living their own lives. Anything outside, we had to do for them.
January 29th, 1910, one of the largest mass killings of African Americans in U.S. history unfolded in a small Texas community. And for over a century, America tried to forget it ever happened. This is the Slocum Massacre. This is the story of a thriving black community that was destroyed, and how descendants fought to make sure the world finally learned the truth. Slocum was a thriving African American community in southeast Anderson County, Texas. Black farmers owned productive land. Black families owned stores, granaries, dairies. Jack Holly, a formerly enslaved man, had built an empire. A dairy, a granary, a general store, and 700 acres of land. This was black wealth. This was black independence. And for some, this was a threat. In the weeks before July 29th, racial tensions had been escalating. A lynching in nearby Cherokee County had sparked fear throughout East Texas. Then came the spark that ignited everything. A white man reported that a black man had been placed in a position of authority on a road construction project. A black supervisor over white workers. In 1910, Jim Crow, Texas, that was seen as unacceptable. Entered Jim Spurger, a local white farmer who became the primary agitator. According to historical records, Spurger made claims, without evidence, that black residents were planning an armed uprising. He spread this rumor throughout neighboring counties, and white men began mobilizing. They armed themselves. Large groups began gathering. On the morning of July 29, 1910, violence erupted. According to Anderson County Sheriff William H. Black, who documented the events, the situation quickly became tragic. Sheriff Black stated that white mobs were engaging in mass violence against black residents with what he described as no legitimate cause. He noted that he believed there may have been 200 or 300 men in the mob, and that he conducted searches of black homes that found minimal weapons, only 9 older shotguns that showed no recent use, along with a small amount of ammunition. What followed was systematic violence. Armed mobs rode through Slocum and surrounding areas. Black residents fled into forests and marshes. According to eyewitness accounts documented in historical records, many families were forced to abandon their homes and properties to escape. The official count reported by authorities was 7 to 8 deaths. However, Sheriff Black made a troubling observation that suggested the true number was far higher. He noted that the scattered nature of the violence made it extremely difficult to account for all victims. The true death toll was never officially determined. According to historian E.R. Bills, who researched the Slocum Massacre, an act of genocide in East Texas, Sheriff Black's own words indicated that the actual number of casualties may have been significantly higher, potentially reaching over 100 or more. The bodies were scattered across the wooded areas of East Texas, with many never properly accounted for. What followed the initial violence was even more significant: a complete system failure of justice. While indictments were issued against Jim Spurger and approximately 15 other men for multiple counts related to the violence, the trial was moved to Harris County. The charges were quietly dropped. None of those indicted were ever prosecuted. Black residents who survived fled the area. Jack Hawley lost his entire estate, his dairy, his granary, his general store, and his 700 acres, when white residents took possession of the property after he and his family escaped to save their lives. The thriving black community was systematically dismantled through both violence and the seizure of property. The larger tragedy was the silence that followed. For 101 years, the massacre was not officially acknowledged by Texas state or local government. It wasn't until 2011 that the Texas legislature formally recognized that this event had occurred. In 2015, the Texas Historical Commission approved a historical marker. Not until January 16, 2016, did a commemorative marker finally stand at the site.
So how would you like to be viewed as a pet? And they did say, the man did say, a superior pet. However, in many instances, we seem to have more concern about animals being treated right. Not that I'm against that. I think cruelty to animals is horrible, but we seem to be more concerned about that than the cruelty that's happened to African Americans, Native Americans, and other human beings. But the man said we had to do all their thinking for them. Well, you didn't want them to be educated, so you tried to keep them down. You tried to keep them in their place, so you invented laws to do that. So it wasn't that African Americans couldn't think, it's that you wanted them to think the way you wanted them to think. And so you invented this idea that they were less intelligent than you were. And I'm talking about I'm putting the third person, whites versus African Americans and other people. Then we look at an African American community, and it wasn't the first, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Tulsa massacre, and now this massacre here in Texas. They were doing well for themselves. They were making money, building wealth, building a possibility of generational wealth, wealth that could be passed down to future generations. But white people didn't like the fact that they were doing so well. So see, leaving African Americans to their own devices many times can provide successes of their own making. But yet white people kept knocking people down again and again and again. They also didn't like that a black person was made a supervisor over white people. That can't happen. Black people can never be over a white person. That is what people thought, or what they portrayed. Something has to be done about it. So now they created a lie that black people were ready to uprise, and they gathered as many people up as they could, and they massacred people. Verified, I think it's at 8, but believed could be well over 100 people, and the entire community was destroyed. So here African Americans were making a success with all this racism around them. They built this small community, and you know how hard it is for a small town to function without a big city. They were building this, same as in Tulsa, but yet white people will not have that, because white people have to feel superior, look superior, and they can't have a group of black people doing something better or even equal to what they're doing. And so they went on a murdering rampage. So when people say, why don't African Americans just pull themselves up by the bootstraps? I like what somebody else says, when you don't have boots with straps or boots to pull up, it's difficult. Every time African Americans tried to build something, many the people would knock them down. Now today we have some success stories, but how difficult are those times? How much harder do they have to work? How many people get knocked down in this society? How many people get sick and die because they don't have health care? Because we have a society that didn't want universal health care, not because universal health care didn't work, but because they didn't want black people to have access to it. They also didn't want Medicare to be 100% because they didn't want black people, the poorest people perhaps, to be able to afford it. There'd be poor whites too who would be just in the same boat. So this country has repeatedly lied to maintain keeping people down. Now, great deal of wealth has got into our healthcare system, the corruption, the absolute disgusting corruption and evil that allows people to die in our healthcare system, and then calls these universal healthcare systems around the world terrible healthcare systems. They don't work when actually they do. Now, does that mean they are perfect? No. And each one of them may have some different things. But we deny access to healthcare from people because we don't want black people or Native Americans or others to have healthcare. We want them to get sick and die, or at the very least, keep them down. Now, of course, then people who did want to care to some point came along with Medicaid. Medicaid in order to fill that gap. What is been going on today with the Trump administration in recent times and these Republican takeovers? We have to get rid of Medicaid. But they don't say it like that. Why do they want to do it? Because they want these marginalized communities to be knocked down and to die off, diminishing their power, especially since African American, Native American, Latinos are going to outnumber whites in the near future. We have to knock them down to maintain our power. Now, why can't we just say we are all human beings and work together? Why can't we care for each other? But when greed and power and hatred get involved, white people have always in this country destroyed people's lives. Does that mean every single Caucasian person? No. But too many, and really the majority, ranging from the people who actually commit the atrocities to the people who do nothing. There are always some people who have stood up for what's right, and they have helped movements move along, but there's still not enough. There's too many people who would rather believe ignorance, and because they don't even have a good self-esteem of themselves, understanding who they are as a human being, they would rather knock other people down in order to somehow elevate themselves when they actually haven't been elevated by doing things productive, turning to God, raising themselves up, by creating things themselves. They would rather stay where they are and push somebody else down, and therefore saying, I'm superior. And it comes down to it. It was the rich and powerful who were the smaller group who wanted to maintain that power, but they became afraid that black people and poor white people would come together and to overturn them. So they started to propagate this idea that if you're poor, but you're white, you were still superior because it's other person's black. In fact, if a black person does succeed to some degree, education, whatever, and you're poor, but you're white, you're still superior over them just because the fact that your skin is light. And we still allow ourselves as poor white people to suffer because we've been convinced that hating some other group elevates us, when in actuality, we're in the same boat. Now, African Americans are treated much worse, but poor whites are also being hurt and discriminated against. When they attack black people with lack of health care or other things, it hurts the poor white community as well. But yet we remain fractured because we believe the lies, that we believe somehow this is superior because we haven't dealt with who we are as human beings. This country keeps saying black people are less intelligent, that they're inferior, they can't do this. And yet black people have risen up again and again, either as a group or as individuals, creating communities, creating organizations, creating businesses, and yet this country still wants to knock them down. Recently, President Trump wanted to eliminate different figures in national museums about slavery because he doesn't want the potent, strong images of abuse to be seen by white people or black people, because he wants to bring down the level and the intensity of what slavery, what racism did. Because if you can make it less intense, then it's not such a big deal and that we can dismiss it. But don't let them do that. Understand the tortures, the absolute evils that this country has committed against its non-white citizens. And its non-white citizens are the ones who really have built this country. This country would be totally different if there was not an African-American inventors that invented things, especially white people stole credit for it, but it would not be the same place. Now, again, white people can be creative. White people can do many things. But I believe they have spent too much time knocking somebody else down when they're successful, trying to keep them down instead of building on what they possibly could do. Why not invent things yourself and give credit to people who invent them, who are African American? Give credit to people who invent them who are Caucasian, instead of just all your energy is putting people down and stealing from them. How many more massacres are there in history? There are many, many times that white people have abused, killed, and murdered just so they can keep black people down. And when a society, when a group of people who are building themselves up is destroyed, it traumatizes the group and it makes them more fearful to stand up. So the more you can put on a group of people to make them fearful, the less they want to reach up and try, the more hopelessness comes into place. Think about it. Your community was destroyed. Now you're afraid. How many different times have white people done this to us? Well, that's over. Really? Really? No, it's not. It happens every day. In Louisville, Kentucky, I talked about it early in the videos. John Marshall was attacked he was the diversity person in Jefferson County Public Schools, and he made a statement to some young African American professionals who, after the election of Donald Trump, asked, "What do we do now?" And he told them that basically face it up, that the majority of people in the state of Kentucky do not care what happens to black people in this state, and many of them will commit violence against African Americans as well. Now, he did this on his own private channel, but a Republican politician came in and said he should be dismissed because he was racist and that it was unforgivable what he said. All right. Now, first of all, it was through his own private channel. Second of all, remember, any time an African American, especially African American men, but anytime an African American stands up to defend people of color, people who are African Americans, people who others, stands up to defend them, how dare them? And the white community says, no, 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 you can't do that. So what he was doing was it was called buck breaking, trying to take a prominent black male and to break him, which was done in other types of violence in an S way. Okay, you have to figure that out. I have to be careful what I say on YouTube. They were literally assaulted in front of other people, other slaves, in order to make sure that they stayed in their place. And many of these men committed suicide after that because of the humiliation. Well, this is just another attempt at doing that in a different way to strip him of his well paying job. And so other African Americans will say we have to stay in our place. This is the same as a massacre, it's just a different approach. And he said that John Marshall was racist. He wasn't racist. It's impossible for black people to be racist because they don't control the narrative. They don't control the money. They don't control education and all these other things. They may have influences in it, but they don't have the power that white people do. Racism is different than hatred. Racism is different than prejudice. Racism is having the systematic power to influence and control the lives of other people. And black people do not have that power over white people. White people do have that power over black people. So again, it is an attempt to humiliate somebody. Praise God that this man did not step down, that he stood his ground, and that other people, African Americans, told him to stand his ground and stand up and called out many racist people in the state of Kentucky. And now Kentucky is not the only place. It's all over this country. Yes, there are states that are more prominent, especially in the South, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. All these places are more prominent, but it's everywhere, folks. It's all over. And until we start dealing with this stuff, why do we keep talking about it? Because people aren't listening. People are keep with this idea of this ridiculous idea of superiority. Until we can break that down, we have to talk about it. We cannot let history be buried. We cannot let the true facts be buried. We have to talk about it. We have to say it, and we have to shout that everybody is equal. Every human being deserves to be treated with dignity. When will this country be what it says it is? Because it is not. Until the next time on American Christian or Christian American.